we have to carry on. Now, these may be hard for you to see, and this was difficult, okay, in terms of photography. I didn't have, I'm a jury rigger. Everything I do is pretty much jury rigged, whatever I can round up. And this is a regular camera where I'm stacking up teleconverters on teleconverters on teleconverters, and, you know, for $100 trying to simulate a $5,000 camera. So the images will be darker sometimes, but the fact is the information is there the best I can if you look at this. And there's some interesting situations that come up. These photographs I'm showing right now, I would not characterize to you as being representative of the primary aspect of the phenomenon. One thing that has been observed over the years is that it appears as though different dissemination or distribution systems for the particulates have been used. It's not like we could, there's a lot of questions about that. You know, people even get in their own particular stance that they have to defend. I don't have that. I see a lot of possibilities there. But these were interesting in that they once again had a break with logic and physics, because these are a set of photographs that they should start to make us ask some questions. And what happens here, if you look at these, you'll find some cases here where you have a dissemination of material occurring from wingspan to wingspan across the entire stretch. The word that I would use is laminar, and laminar flow, a sheet flow. A sheet flow of material coming out. But what happens when I look at the plane? Well, first of all, this particular plane, hard for you to see, I've seen it, so it's not fair to me, but the engines of this aircraft are on the fuselage. These engines are not even on the wings. Okay? I think it's MD-80, I think. People know more on the aviation than I do, but nevertheless, there's a class of aircraft that have the engines on the wing. You have a physical problem here in that I have this emission of materials coming about. It's not entirely an isolated case. I'm not saying it's representative either, but it's not entirely isolated. That is physically impossible for that material to be coming from those engines in that case. Okay? Now, I am familiar, or at least I try to be fair, with, let's call it dissenting arguments. There is one here that comes up on what you call vortex on wings. All I can say is, one of the first things I do, if there's ever a question, is I try to legitimately and fairly study the opposing perspective and give that a credence and attention it deserves. I can only say I've done that for this. It doesn't work again. Again, we'd have to dig into the papers and the work, but it doesn't suffice. You know, it doesn't. Another time, if you want to get into that stuff, I will. These are progression photographs. This is I didn't take these. This is somebody in Albuquerque that set up their camera all day long and just said, "Hey, this is what I see." Certainly, what we can say at the very least is that we witness a progression here where a transformation of the atmosphere has taken place and appears to be as a direct influence of aircraft activity. How's that for a mouthload? But I think that's a fair statement. And progression photos can be very interesting, or time-lapse, because you see things in a way that you don't. This guy is white. Okay, so I'm going to try to punch through these. This is a part of the... I apply myself. If you give me a problem and I think it's important, I apply myself to it. I didn't have much of the research done here is original research. It simply doesn't exist. And I would simply apply myself the best I can. And I did the work on the physics and chemistry. That probably occupied, you have probably a couple years of mostly photography. I'm just taking images and documenting. Then I'm starting to get into the mechanics and physics of what's going on and to start saying, hey, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense? And so I have to develop models. I mean, my background is in math and such, so I develop models. So I try to explain things. These things didn't exist. They don't exist because it's sort of interesting, but contrail formation is not exactly the type of thing you want people to know about. The formation of those actually has some security implications in terms of aircraft. I tried to find public available models on contrail formation. Hey, let's just get it out there if it's already done. I don't want to have to create things from scratch if I don't need to. I looked, there wasn't anything. The only one I found was some guy back in the 50s, okay? What's called a nomograph, which is a graphical view. It wasn't even an analytical presentation. It was a graphical form written in the 50s. It's the best I could come up with. So I had to do my own work in terms of asking what's logical and what's not. So that's what these are all about. It demonstrates that work that's going on in the background for at least 2 to 3 years. discontinuities and breaks. I know the counter-arguments. I'm not going to go into this level of detail now. But from a logical standpoint, there's some questions that this raises. When you have a break in something, okay? I know it's a fluid medium and all that, but you don't have that severity of that break there. One of the interesting things about this photograph was that when I put it up there, let's just say I had a very concerted effort made to me to try to find out very much the particulars and details of that photograph. Meaning, they wanted time and date and place and orientation and the whole thing. Again, my own interpretation, I could be wrong, but it appeared in this case they had a special interest in that pilot, and they wanted to know that specific flight so that this could be identified. Because this is not particularly advantageous to your cause of, let's say, obscurity of presentation. And in addition, neither are those planes with the full wingspan flow. Those aren't particularly beneficial towards a case of minimalist presentation. And we can say it's interesting or it's curious, I don't know, but we can also say that after I started putting up those photographs of this style, let's just say I was not able to collect any more of those particular types of photographs. Some people have, but I never have. I would measure, people will say these aircraft, hey, they're flying at 5,000, 3,000 feet, they're flying right over my head. I'm sorry, from my side, not the case. I measured the altitude of these planes photogrammetrically. Not a single plane was less than 35,000 feet over my head anywhere that I took a photograph. And that's why the imagery is difficult to collect. You can't get the kind of detail that you might like. Santa Fe, New Mexico, is it April 14th, 2008? I don't know. Mountains of Santa Fe. I call a tower on this one, I had my little gung-ho too, for a while, and I called the tower on this one. I don't do that kind of stuff that often. It was just an interesting exchange a little bit. I said, the airport there in Santa Fe is probably about 5 miles from where I lived, and I called him and I just said, you see what's going on over those mountains there? And there was this really uncomfortable pause. That's all I can say in a conversation. It was like, when you're talking to someone and it's just too long for their response. This is the way it was. It was like 10 to 15 seconds, just a dead time. And then he comes back and says, what do you mean? Okay. And I say, well, what's going on over there is not normal. And then you have a little more uncomfortable pause, but not quite as long, okay, as the first time. And he says, well, what do you mean? Everything's fine to me. This was that type of exchange, and they're just representative of the wall that people ran into, over and over and over, and difficult to accommodate. Okay, if you look closely, you can see the atmosphere is a fluid environment. Right? Moisture, if it's released in an even sense, would be expected to be evenly distributed and dissipate uniformly as well in a fluid medium. Right? Well, I called them core lines, but the first time I saw this, some interesting things going on. That within the emissions was a centralized, or I call them core lines, of focused material of some kind. I can only say it doesn't, to me, satisfy the expectation of water vapor release. And you remember my whole point before, that if I have persistence under these conditions, that I've already got a problem with water vapor alone. But in this case, now I have questions about concentration of material coming in also. How am I doing on that time business I was talking about?
3:25.
When did I want to quit? 3:30 on this first part? Okay. I wonder how many more I have. Well, I guess we can take a break and see how many more I have. This photograph is up here simply to say, we might have some questions that we want to be asking here. I didn't take this photograph, but it was given to me. I direct source from that person. I know who it was given. You know, he gave it to me directly. He's the original. It's interesting. That's all I can say. In this case, I don't even know exactly what it means, but you had a ring. You have a ring here, and then you have this equivalent laminar flow occurring the diameter of that ring. Now, I don't know what it means. I can't give you all the answers. I'm just saying when I see this, it causes me to ask some questions. Okay?